FireMonkey Evolution, and this is my fourth Delphi-Tage. So I'm actually quite happy to be here. I mean, the locations they pick are actually wonderful. I mean, they're not kind of the standard boring training venues. So I think the ship was the most interesting one, but this is also very nice. So the topic of this session is FireMonkey, and like 50% of my demos you've already seen. So, well, I don't know. I mean, we'll chat about something. Well, I'll find topics to cover. But yeah, I mean, there is a bit of overlap for the previous sessions, and I'll try to avoid that as much as possible. In case you don't know me, I'm probably the most prolific Delphi book author out there, although I haven't written recently. I'm writing a FireMonkey book that was kind of halfway through. Now they've redone FireMonkey, so I'm still kind of have to start again. Not really, but some of it. I've spoken at a conference around. I do training and consulting specifically. I do an event with Kerry Jensen that also comes to Frankfurt. We've been there the last 3 years and likely going to get back. I was recently awarded with the MVP title, whatever that means. That's fun. So the idea is to, well, first give you a kind of an introduction to FireMonkey, because we can take it for granted, but it might not be the right thing to do. We're going to go through some of the new features, and again, trying to skip those you've already seen too much about, like some of the media stuff. And then I'm going to spend a little bit of time on the Metropolis integration and on the Delphi-Tage, just because I'm probably the only person who can make it running, because it's a bit of a mess. But anyway, we'll get to that. So before we actually get started, who has actually written code with FireMonkey, in version 1? OK. Who has seen demos and has kind of a good understanding of the framework? OK. Who has no clue about that is? I mean, what? That's a new word. No idea at all about FireMonkey? OK, well, good. So this is the FireMonkey in 5 minutes. I usually do it like in 2 days, but it's 5 minutes. What is it? Well, OK, it's a library. It's a user interface library. They call it application platform because it's a nicer name. But it's a user interface library, after all. It has a couple of specific features that put it apart from, well, basically anything else that's available in other languages, platforms, development environments. One is that you still compile your applications. The reason a runtime or interpreter or anything is still your Delphi compiled code. But also you get quite a lot of your graphic operations that are powered by the GPU. Sent to the GPU, specifically on Windows, using DirectX. So for example, already in the VCL, you can use the Direct2D support and the Direct2D canvas and do some Direct2D. But you use that for painting on the screen only. I mean, if you have some complex graphics, you can take your VCL app, just place a surface, a form or something, and paint with the Direct2D canvas. You get speed, you get a lot of power, but that's it. But everything else in your application is still a traditional Windows app. FireMonkey brings it to kind of the next level, which is what other environments have done, like Silverlight or WPF, which is not just for the graphic, but even for the visual controls for your buttons, edit boxes, check boxes, whatever. They are all painted with the same technique. OK? It lets you do 3D as well. I'm not going to cover much of the 3D, just a couple of things. It's written in Delphi, which helps a lot, not just because, hey, we like it, it's written in Delphi, but because being written in Delphi, and given you get the source code, which is, again, a little unusual for other competing platforms, you can debug through the code. And you can, in case the documentation is not perfect, read the source code and try to figure out what's happening behind the scenes. So this is valuable. And of course, you might take it for granted because if you're coming from the VCL and Delphi background. But if you're coming from other environments, when you show to people, you can trace into the source code. I mean, OK, tell someone who uses Flex and Flash to trace into the source code of the library. I mean, there's no such a thing. Okay, and even on the Microsoft platform, they release the source code with kind of conditions and rules and things, and it's not kind of the same experience you get here. So FireMonkey is completely abstract in terms of UI. Your buttons are not buttons. They look like buttons. They behave like buttons. So they can be described as buttons, but they're not technically Windows button objects. I mean, handles or windows that are created with the button class type, which is what they are on the VCL. Even if you do custom painting, they're still button object with a custom painting. In this case, it's just a pure paint, like the graphic controls on the VCL side. I mean, when you have a label, there's nothing there for the operating system. And exactly this happens for everything within your forms. The forms are still Windows, I mean, or Mac Windows or whatever, but everything within your form is completely abstract. It's native, it's compiled code, uses GPU libraries, it's compiled in your apps. That's another big difference compared to other libraries. You don't have to deploy FireMonkey, install FireMonkey to the end user machines and then install your application that runs on FireMonkey. You compile FireMonkey into the application. And again, you say, well, yeah, that's what we've always done with Delphi. Sure, but that's unusual for, the rest of the industry. Try to run a Silverlight application without the Silverlight runtime. It will not run. In this case, you can deploy the single executable, which is handy because you don't have to rely on, the version, the library, installation. It's good for PCs, it's even better for phones, where the installing third-party libraries is not only very complicated for the average phone user, which just clicks and wants something working, but it might be deemed illegal by the platform owner, like Apple. No, runtimes are not allowed. Fine. And you're stuck if you're based on that technology. Still, remember that it's not that you're forced to do that. If you're, for example, on Windows, and you have your applications, and will be many applications, you can still deploy the packages, the runtime packages, and use runtime packages. That's fine. It's there. It's available. So if you want your application to remain smaller because you are updating it frequently, you deploy with the runtime packages. You have that flexibility that you always had, well, since Delphi was 2, I think, or 3, whatever. When we got the full support for runtime packages, we have the same capability in FireMonkey. If you want to go runtime packages, go for it. But you're not. You can also go with the single executable, which is a bit bigger, yes, but it's your option. It's not you are forced to do that. So what you get, visual controls that still inherit from T components. So everything is integrated in like the designer is, well, not the same identical designer, but the same technology. The streaming is the same. An FMX file is not much different from a DFM file. So you are based on the same overall architecture, and you can mix and match non-visual components into a FireMonkey application because they are T-component descendants. They work fine. It's the T-wing controls in the VCL that you cannot use anymore in FireMonkey because they are replaced by the FireMonkey visual controls, T-controls and descendants. Okay? And of course, the reason you want to do this is not because it's different, but because you get, well, two main reasons. One, the cross-platform support. You're never going to get the VCL because it's tied to the core Windows architecture. And the second, you have a lot of flexibility in terms of the graphic UI. Now, with styles in VCL, since Delphi XE2, we really have quite some flexibility for the VCL side as well in terms of UI. But what you can get in FireMonkey in terms of effects, animations, flexibility in terms of styles, it's actually much more than you can get in the VCL. The fact you can take a button and tilt a button or turn a button or scale a button or do like a lot of operations on a pretty trivial component that you can really do on the VCL side because it's constrained by the fact it's a Windows handle, and Windows, are rectangular and do not move around the screen. They are they still sit there. You can turn a Windows in window. It's not a feature the operating system supports. Okay, so that's the FireMonkey idea and foundation. Now we can start looking into what's new for the second version, FM2 or whatever you want to call it, of FireMonkey. These are features that have been mentioned, but they haven't been shown, so now I'm going to do the demo for those features. One of them, which I actually really like a lot, is the idea of using anchors. So if you create a file new, FireMonkey desktop application, and we have one of the most interesting and powerful wizards. It's just these two options. And rather than having two entries like it was in XE2, now we have a single entry with two radio buttons. Wow, great. We're going to do an HD or 2D application. So it's a plain traditional app. And then what we can do, we can turn in a button here and maybe add a memo. And then what we can do is say, hey, yeah, I want this layout. But of course, I don't want this behavior that when I make this bigger, they remain that size. But I want this to be anchored to the right side rather than the left side. So when we run it, well, actually even at design time, this remains tied to the proper side of the window. And then if we take the memo and we do 4 anchors, exactly like you've done in the VCL, I guess. So it's not surprising you get this behavior. Okay? Now, the thing that is a bit confusing is that it's true that you can get anchors, but there is some sort of a conflict within a different feature. Let me disable anchors, and then we'll enable them again and turn everything back. A feature that I tend to like and use a lot, which is using a scale layout within the back of my form. So just grab a scale layout, align it to the client area, and then move your components within the scale layout, which I haven't done. Wait, come on, get it. Wait, you should get into it. Fine, it's not working. It was working like yesterday. So it's, yeah, it's doable, but I don't like to have to do it. Now, they are inside. So what happens is that we get a totally different approach, which is something we don't get on the VCL side, which is full-blown scaling, which might be better if you want to adapt your application to larger and smaller screen compared to just anchoring. Yeah, well, for example. So anchors are, I mean, it's very nice to have anchoring. I like it a lot, but it's either one or the other. Because if you try to use them together, I'm going to show that to you. We have to make a little bit of fun. If we use them together, they both scale and resize, and I think it gets into a mess because this gets too big. So you don't want to get into this scenario. So anchors are very useful. And again, I've used them a lot in the VCL. I like using them in FireMonkey. But you should consider, I mean, you should not always take what you've done in the VCL and kind of move it over in the same way to FireMonkey. Because FireMonkey has, I mean, alternative options like scaling. This is just one example. There are many others. So you have to consider if within the features that FireMonkey provides you, this is the best way to do things. I mean, doing the same things you did in the VCL is the best way of doing it. At times it is, but at times it's not. So just to put things in a good perspective. There are some new layouts that are actually quite nice. In the VCL, there are no layouts, but there are panels that have the layout behavior, like the flow panel. Who has used the flow panel in the VCL? Yeah, OK. Well, it has some power, but it has some kind of, it's usable in specific areas. So let's get rid of this one, and let's drop in a flow panel. And there are two options. There is the one with the breakout, which is actually quite nice. And let's get rid of the button as well and make this as big as the entire form. Wait, align client. Oh, sure. Fine. So cut this, delete this, paste this, resize this, and align it to the client area. So the idea here is to use the same layout of HTML, kind of. So you put something on screen, and the next thing goes next, and the next thing goes next. So you're not using the position, left and top, but position in FireMonkey, to determine where your components show up, but you're just using a layout. So suppose we want to have a bunch of buttons in this form, and I'm going to shift-click it, and so the buttons just follow. One follows the other. Okay? And of course, when you resize the form, they will adapt to the available area. So they will, I mean, you get the new lines where there's not enough room for the next control. Now, this is nice if you have a set of controls that are either similar, because they are the same component, or similar in size. But if you start putting like an edit, a button, a label, it gets kind of messed up. So it's not the kind of UI you want. Still, what you can do, you can have containers or panels in Delphi, or layouts, I mean T-layouts in FireMonkey. So you have these panels, these containers that have multiple components like the label, the edit, and some buttons that are duplicated multiple times in your form. So it's doable, it's usable, and it's flexible, because it's another way, it's another alternative compared to anchoring or scaling to have flexibility to your application structure. Now, the other thing you certainly want to do in this case is grab all of these guys here and enable the margins, which are down here. So we might have a couple of pixels margin on each side for your controls, and it's not working. Fine. Because it doesn't, oh, it's, okay. Okay, I got the margin. So they're not kind of all crammed one into the other, but there is some room between the various controls. It's slightly different. There's no alignment with margins like in the VCL, but I mean, it's more or less the same idea. Okay? Now, if you use the flow with breaks, you can determine where you go to a new line. I mean, something that this has to go to the new line, like a hard break on a text document, okay, or on an HTML document. Okay, so that's anchors and layouts. Now, these are nice. These are visual things. Again, there are alternatives in FireMonkey. One feature that I really, really like to have is the action list action architecture. Who uses actions in VCL? About half, which is good. I mean, there are in some applications it might not be the perfect approach, but it's a very nice architecture because it lets you have behavior that depends on, completely separate the user interface from the behavior of the application. And in one side, it's easy. So suppose we want to have a pop-up menu here, and we hook it to this panel, the layout, and then we have some menu items. Fine. Okay. Now we want to have our button one doing a show message. Hello, Heidelberg. Actually, hello. I'm translating. And you want the same behavior like when you click on this button here. So we can either duplicate it, which is a nonsense thing, or go grab the same. Oops, wait. On click event handler button one click. So now we have the behavior tied to the two visual controls. So we click on the button, or we go menu item one and get the same effect. But, and this is good, but it's very hard to update or modify or adapt the UI to the status of the application if you have multiple ways to perform the same action. This is where actions come in very handy because what we can just drop an action list here. And once we have the action list, we can open the action list editor. Notice there is no action manager. It's action list only. So you can kind of drag things to toolbars. But toolbars are so old-fashioned. You don't want to use them anymore. So suppose you have actions. And now what you can do, you can hook. You can create the action, customize the action. And the action is going to have an on-execute piece of code, which we're going to move over my existing code. Okay, and I just wanted to save to remove the empty method, not because I wanted to save. And now we can also do another thing. We can say action dot, is it text? Wait. Tick, 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 tick. Is it? How's the name? Oh, yeah, cool, great idea. Okay, text, that's what I thought it was. Hello, done. Okay, and the other thing we want, well, whatever. And the other thing we want to do is to change the action text, the initial text, to hello. Okay, now what we can do, we grab this component here, we hook it to our action 1, and it says hello, and then we go, again, we go to the pop-up menu, get the menu item, hook it to action 1, and it becomes hello. And not only we get the behavior that's selecting one or the other, we execute that code, but also what happens is that we're going to change the UI for both elements, for 1, 2, 3, 25, whatever you have, user interface elements according to the status of the action. And at the same, you can disable the action, you can check it, you can do a number of operations that will reflect on the UI of the component. You can have dynamic updates, enable if there is something in the clipboard, and all of these things. There is another thing you can do. You can grab one button, one object, not only select an existing action, but create a new action or a new standard action. So for example, a new standard action I can grab is window to window close. So not only the button will say close window, but without having to write any code, we get the close window behavior. So these predefined actions can provide the UI and the behavior. And for example, there is the navigator bound to the visual live bindings that lets you create a navigator with your own user interface controls. You pick the user interface control, just hook the navigation actions ready to use, and it will show different things depending on the status in DB. If you're on the first record, the last record, if it's editing, not editing, you know, all of that stuff that a navigator does for you. But with a lot of flexibility, because you can pick a completely custom UI. You can have images for the navigator rather than buttons. You can have whatever you want. Okay? So that's the idea, separating the UI from the behavior. Now, actions are also useful because they are some sort of foundation for touch and gestures. So now that we have actions, they could plug in the gesture architecture, which is really bound to actions. Because what we can do now under our panel, yes, if we right-click, we get the menu, but we can also plug in a gesture manager. So, and we can now select one of our controls and go under the touch property, hook the specific gesture manager, go for one of the actions that will be, one of the standard actions, which will be move left, whatever, and hook it to the same action. So now if we run this application and we use our finger, which I'm not using because this is not the touch screen, or mouse, and move left, nothing happens. That's cute. Ah. Sorry? It should be working. It was an easy one. Move left. Is it hooked up? I think it is. Yeah. It's selected here. You don't have to enable it. There's actually no property here. It's hooked to the flow layout. Now, maybe the flow layout has issues with the touch stuff, but it sounds a bit odd. Let me try to move up and pick another one. We're going to window close. And there isn't generally much else you have to do to have actions enabled. Let's try once more. Up, or is it down? Well, I'm pressing and moving, yeah, and not just moving. I'm doing that. I don't know. Okay, up and left. These are the two actions. And generally, all you have to do is to enable that. I don't want an interactive one. The gesture manager is there. It might be the component itself. But yeah, let's do it this way. Let's drop panel and align it to the bottom. Well, no, I did it completely wrong. Wait, the panel shouldn't be inside the layout. The panel should be inside the form. So let me select the form and get the panel. And it's in the form, and then I align it to, align it to the bottom. And now make this a little bigger, and then handle the gestures in the panel. Let's see if it is any different. So right and up. And let's see if it works. Okay, well, you know, it's demo mode. Oh yeah, action 3 does nothing, which wasn't a good idea, but action 1 does something, and it should be triggered. The other thing we can do, just in case, you can actually handle the on gesture, and just do a show message. Well, no, let's do a caption, colon equals hi, and say if we can get any gesture through the gesture manager. No. Hey, hello, mouse. Oh, okay. Could be, but it's not required. You never know. It's a good suggestion. Let's see if it does anything different. Okay, I have the gesture-resistant application here. Yeah, no, I mean, I've done demos and they were working, so I'm probably doing something. Yeah, I used to have form gestures, so that might be part of it. But anyway, that's the idea, and I've used it. It did work. Media devices and sensors, you've seen a lot of those. Now I don't have like sensor. If I can try to throw you the computer, I don't think it will do anything but break. So I can really demo those. I have a bunch of nice media player demos, which happen to be exactly the demos that David has shown. So I'll probably skip those. I don't think it's that relevant. It's really a sophisticated architecture, again, not just displaying media, but you can also get input from camera and other sources. You need code for capturing. You didn't need code, you just hook in the media player to the media control for the display, and that's actually quite flexible. One thing that I wanted to show, though, is this one. Let's suppose we want to handle the position. That's not position, it's location, sorry. So let's suppose we drop in a location center. And again, this doesn't work on this machine. But the thing that I wanted to show you is, because at times we have this, we as Delphi community have this feeling, oh, I mean, there are other developers working on architectures where the developers of the architecture use all the high-end features of the language and do things that we are used to this kind of old-fashioned way of coding. Now, these components, when I'm going to get you how these components are written, that will, for some of you, will be a bit of an experience, because these components are based on generic components. So there's a generic T-sensor class, and this inherits from the T-sensor class customized for a given sensor low-level object. So there are T-sensor, which is the low-level architecture, and then there are the controls that are made of the sensor through a very sophisticated architecture based on generics. So, but it's not really true that this is kind of an interesting way of writing complex architectural code behind the scenes. And I think, as far as I know, these are the first generic-based components that we have in Delphi since, well, generics have been around like a few years now, but there was never a kind of generic-based component. I mean, if you look inside this code, it's quite interesting. And the flexibility you have, you gain at runtime. So every sensor has an internal sensor object, but they're all of different types. And they're all type safe. I mean, when you do code completion, when you work on those, they are specific to the sensor you are using at the given time, because that's the object that you get behind the scenes. Okay? So what you can do, again, is if we get back to the source code and hook onto a button, you can do, when you write the code, you have features at the higher level, but then you can also do sensor, and you can go for methods at the lower level of the object. And again, using different sensors, the sensor object will be of a different type with different methods, different features. Yes?
The controller connected via USB to your notebook, is that a sensor?
I don't think there is direct support for Kinect. I mean, someone could plug in, because this is, as I was showing, it's an open architecture made of building blocks. So it's probably feasible to plug in a Kinect device to this architecture, but it's not part of the product. It's not available right now. There are other Delphi components for Kinect that have been available before and probably still work, but they're not based on this structure. Okay. So that was the thing I want to show about sensor. I mean, kind of a little bit of behind the scenes to get you a feeling. Styles revisited. Now, some of the features we've seen up to now are things that, well, that VCL developers asked for and Embarcadero delivered in version 2. Now, there are many other features like all of the video and media stuff that was never really part of the VCL and gestures. So these are new features that came to the platform, of course, driven by the need to support the mobile level, but also because sooner or later we'll get PCs, and Windows 8 has a complete API for sensors management and location management and everything else. So it makes sense going towards the future to have this support. But again, it's not something coming from the VCL. If you want to think about styles, styles are completely specific to FireMonkey in terms of architecture. And if I can put it this way, styles are the foundation of FireMonkey. So everything is style-based. Every user interface control is style-based. But in what we had in FireMonkey 1 was, I don't know, kind of you take a concept and you implement it, like in a manual. So you just go through the steps, and you are faithful to the concept, and you follow through, and you get things working. And it is working. I mean, it's working very nicely. But there are situations where this is not the perfect thing. There are efficiency reasons. There are development reasons, like some properties are nice to have and to be able to change without having to mess through the styles. There are platform reasons. You want the button to look like any other iOS or Apple button, or it's not that true on Windows. Windows users, I mean, if it looks somehow like a button, well, they click on it. I mean, because of course they have XP that has button with the orange border, then they got Windows Vista, then they got Windows 7, now they got Windows 8. Buttons are always completely different. And they used to be square, then they went rounded, now they're square again. I mean, come on, can you decide if they're square corners or rounded corners? So Windows users are happy. I mean, it looks like a button, they click it. I mean, Mac users, oh, yeah, it's somehow like a button, but it's kind of, there's one extra pixel missing here. I'm not sure, should I click it? I mean, it's not kind of the right button. They are a little picky. I'm just joking. But so you want something that looks really, really right. And the only way to get something that's really identical is just to copy and paste it. I mean, use a bitmap. If you use vector graphic to reproduce the behavior of a button, And if it says a shade, you can create a shading effect to get back the shade. But of course, it will not be identical to the shade of that button on the platform. So, okay, they want more pragmatic in version 2, and they allow for kind of shortcuts to the original model to not really compromising the model, because the model is still there and they're still based on styles, but they account for more flexibility and more options, which is good. Now, the model got even more complicated, but that's a kind of slight side effect. Okay, so let me open an existing demo with styles. I think I grabbed this one. Yeah, the non-client demo you've seen. We need to save change. Yeah, let's save change. Project Unit 3 and Project 4 are very good names. Let's go for those. So this is an example I already had. That's an XE2 example, where what I can do, I have some controls. I have controls with a custom style. So what I did here was to get here and went for custom style for the control, and I decided that my button had, the text had yellow color. Now you define the style, and you can apply the same style name to other user interface controls, like this button down here. It's not a duplicate, it just refers to the same style structure. Oh, and also here I have a text object. Text object is the low level, is the graphic level object, while a label is a higher end user interface object based on the text plus the color depending on the style. This is very nice, but this means that originally, if you wanted to change the text, the color of your label, you had to write, in XC2, you had to write code like this. Oh, give me the text object within my label, and then change the color of the text object within the label style, which is readable, but is kind of not the best code you'd write if you want to change colors often. Now, if we go and look what's available in XE3, in FireMonkey 2, there is kind of an easier to use property, which is the font color of the label. So labels have a font color. Okay, so now I can say, hey, yeah, I want the font color to be dark blue. Dark blue looks fine. Okay, so now we have our dark blue color. But what happens now if we load a style that uses a dark background? We have a wonderful blue label on dark gray, which is unreadable. So you can still, and the second label down there is white, but it's not white. I'm using the style, the color of the style. The label up there is blue because it uses a hard-coded color. So it's a bit confusing, but you have more options. You can decide to have labels that follow the style or decide for custom coloring of your user interface controls. It's your choice. Okay, and getting back to in a second. And the nice thing is that there is a way to determine what you want, which is a new property, which is style settings. If you go to the style settings, you can determine which of the features of this control come from the style and which of the features are overridden by local properties. Now, if I want to get back to the style color, I just enable within the style setting the font color. And that's get back to black, but it's not black, it's the style. So if I now go for a dark style with white text, it will follow suit. Yep.
If you want to highlight some labels by click on a button, is there a list of readable colors to choose for like Windows text, Windows?
You can use symbolic elements rather than hard-coded colors. Yeah, there are similar things. There are similar colors. So
you can define, for example, 10 colors in a style to choose?
Well, no. What you do, you can decide, you can pick, no, these are colors only? Yeah. Well, in code. When you write it in code, you can pick one of the symbolic colors, like the text color, the button color, the highlighted color, and they will be translated on a specific color based on the style.
Is it possible to define 4, 5, 6 highlighted colors?
Not that I know of.
Only one.
There is one. I mean, yeah, that's the idea. And then, of course, you can come up with one. There is another way, which is the FireMonkey way of doing things, which is you can add to the style, you can add a style for highlighted label. This is your, like I did the custom style for that button. So you can have 1, 2, 3, 4, 25 highlighted label styles to pick for. But this is your style, so it will not adapt to if the user chooses the black, the green, the yellow, the white background. But if within a single default style, you want to style your elements logically, yes, that's what you do. Like here, to change the style of these buttons is straightforward because I've already defined the style. I just go to style lookup, get here, and this is back normal. I get here, I paste in this text, and get my new style.
But if you load the default style, this is gone.
If you load a completely different default style, it is gone. Of course, you can just paste it back. But paste it back is easy. But of course, if your standard style has some completely different set of colors, it will look wrong. And that's, you don't have a universal style adapter that adapts you to the style. There isn't such a thing. Yes?
Can a style have additional properties?
Can a style have additional properties? Yes and no. Within a style, you can add sub-objects. Like you can have a button that have 2 text items. If you want to do it, it's doable. Or 2 text items plus an image. So the style can have extra features. And you can, using the low-level code like this code, you can, at runtime, grab one of these sub-objects and change every feature. I mean, text, color, whatever. But it's not that these properties are added to the component or anything like that. And the style hasn't got properties. The features of a style is the set of features of the elements you use to build the style. The style is built of building blocks. Of course, you can also create your own building blocks, custom components, and make them available, custom graphic component, and make them available as building blocks for style. So it is completely open in terms of architecture. You can really do almost everything. Yes?
Whenever articles, colors, or similar kind of thing, and I always want to stick to the style itself, which I said, in code or during design time.
You can query the style and figure out which are the active colors for the current style. You can enumerate all of the style colors. You can do a lot on the. You have to use the root object inside the style. But this brings us a little outside of the topic. So I'll try to get back to the main issues I wanted to cover. Again, I skipped all of the media demo. I don't want to get too much into the materials because actually David I showed you how you can use the material rather than changing the colors of a sphere. You can change the material. But there is one thing that got me completely by surprise that I'm going to share with you, just in case. Of course, this means this part is kind of incompatible with the 3D materials in XC2. But the other thing is that, so the first thing I did when I got XC3, I turned on a cube. Well, figure out what you have to do. You have to take one of these non-visual objects, which is the material, this shade of blue, whatever it is. And then the second thing I did was turn on a light and say, hey, you can see how the light changed the material, and nothing was happening. And I was puzzled because XC2, you put the light, put the material, and it looks fine. And in fact, if you look at this other cube, which has this bitmap behind it, there is no light effect. It's completely... Because what happens is that you have multiple types of materials, and this is not immediately obvious. So you have a color material. So what I wanted to do is to put some color. I pick the color material. Seemed like the obvious choice. And then you have the texture material, which is what I'm probably using for the bitmap, which, OK, is good if you have a texture. And then I kind of even didn't notice it was this light material. And light not meaning it's not heavy. Light meaning it reflects lights. I mean, the texture and color material don't reflect light, which is good because they're probably more optimized if you don't want to use lights. So they make sense. But if you want to have the light effects, you have to pick the light material source. Okay? And then you can still determine if you have the ambient, the diffusion, and all of how it reflects light and the colors. These features were kind of hard-coded into the material, into the component. So it's a much cleaner architecture, but it's different. At the beginning, it could be slightly confusing. Visualized bindings is one of the most relevant new features in FireMonkey 2 because it makes so easy to create user interface from database data, period, because you have seen it. So I already knew I had to skip this. Now, I'm going to spend 2 minutes describing you Windows 8. And again, it could take 2 days. It's 2 operating systems in one. So it's cheaper. You save 50% of the money. And because there are 2, one is called desktop, and one is called, you don't know, whatever happens. I just keep calling it Metro because that's kind of a reasonable name. The desktop is fully supported by Delphi because it's traditional UI and Win32 API. It's these two things combined. Metro is a specific UI and a different runtime. Okay, what they're called modern apps or whatever. Microsoft is very confused about the name. And it's oh, well, I don't want to get into that stuff. So it's not just a different UI, but it's also a different runtime. Now, this different runtime requires specific compiler support, specific runtime library support, and it's not kind of similar to what we're used to because you cannot read a file unless you could do it through a separate thread with an async invocation. You cannot access to the file system. You cannot access to sockets. You cannot access to memory. You cannot access to, you don't have the same exceptions model. It's completely different development model. And it's not really a development model thought for computers. It's a development model thought for phones. And they're adapting the phone development model to computers. So you get into this very funny situation that you have like an 8-core machine. You're running a WinRT application because you want to do Facebook. Then you switch to the mail. And of course, I mean, every second in Facebook something new happens, as you know. You switch to mail, and after 3 seconds, your Facebook application is frozen. Will not get any more CPU time, won't do anything, will just remain there where it was. Windows might even kill it if it's using too much memory. And then when you get back to Facebook, it will get revived, will fetch the new data, and start going again. And again, I have an 8-core machine. I'm having one application full screen, which is just a UI thing, but also one application working at a time on my CPU. So the other 7 cores can sit there idle and have a lot of fun. And the reason is, because you want to save battery. And I looked into, and I tried to open my computer, my desktop, and I couldn't find the battery. And I mean, yeah, there's a plug to the wall, and it's good enough. But that's it. We have these limitations because we have to save battery. And the other thing is there is only one single way to get those apps, which is through the application store, shop, whatever, that Microsoft has. You can't install these apps to computers via a floppy disk. Well, of course, that's why you do things, floppies. The only way to do installation is through the store. So is it a good model for if you want to get your application into 1 million people's hands because it's the best Facebook UI ever thought of? Yes, it's a good way. It's a good way to update your business application. You sell to your 20 customers. No, it's a bad way because you're going to give 20% of the money to Microsoft and go to buy through the shop, and the application will sit there, and then they'll move to the mail, and then the invoices won't catch up. They don't get up-to-date business data. I mean, it's not the right model. So for the business side of applications, or for most of the applications, I guess you generally develop, you don't really want to go there. The only advantage is this could get you to the phones and to the tablets that are ARM-based. If the tablet is Intel-based, you still can run your desktop application. So what Embarcadero did was kind of shuffle these 4 cards and mix them up a little bit and come up with the specific UI on the Win32 API, which is doable. It's technically doable. Actually, there are quite a few windows and panes in Windows 8 that are Win32 but use the Metro UI. And even the new Office has some Metro UI pages here and there. So it's not that it doesn't make any sense. It's a bit awkward, and I'm not sure Max is going to love to get Metro-like application running on Windows XP. So you need to upgrade your Windows XP. No, I can have the full screen Metro apps there written in Delphi. Great. So because it's not tied. I mean, it's just a UI thing. It's just a design thing. So your Metropolis app can actually run on any version of Windows that Delphi supports. OK? OK, sure. Yeah, it was hard to get it in 2 minutes, but whatever. So we have Metropolis. It's the Metro UI or Modern UI or Store UI. They will change another 5 names between here and when Windows 8 ships in a month. Because they're, but, well, let's call it the Modern UI. It's a Modern UI clone, but it's for Win32 apps. And you can move your VCL apps to that. Now, the only issue is where you do convert, the conversion goes through. The thing is that you have to make all your buttons and labels and edits bigger. So you have to kind of shuffle a little bit of your user interface because you need bigger fonts. That's one of the mantras of Metro UI. I think maybe developers are getting older, so rather than putting glasses, they get the bigger fonts. That might be part of it, whatever. And that's one thing that we get, and we get applications that look like this. And this is FireMonkey application. It's full screen, it shows up, and it looks like an interesting application, but it doesn't look like a traditional Win32 app, but it is a Win32 app. In fact, if we look into the task manager, I've got no room here, so I have to do this right click. We go into the task manager. It's not an app, meaning a WinRT application, but it's a traditional process. Okay, and it's even a 32-bit process, and not a 64-bit one. Okay. Now, the other thing that they decided to put into was a way to integrate with the desktop, which is one of the features of the desktop, is that you get this live tiles. Now, live is kind of a misnomer, okay? Because, I mean, if you think of a live person, I mean, like when I think about my kid, he can keep working and moving and talking for like 20 hours a day, and that's live. I mean, that's very energetic. These are not really energetic tasks. By default, the system will give them a little bit of CPU time in a background thread every 15 minutes. Like, how do you get your Facebook updates every 15 minutes? It's an eternity. But even like the stocks information is ready 20 minutes delayed. Then you have 15 minutes update. I mean, that's kind of yesterday values. I mean, is it? But that's the model. And so everything you do has this. So they're not that much alive. But somehow they can refresh their content. And how they refresh the content? Well, because they have a background thread that is allowed to keep running even when the application is stopped. Okay? Now, what Embarcadero has done is created a universal application for you that you customize in 2 ways. First, you hook in a unique ID because that's what is required. And second, you can talk to a service that's sitting on the same machine. So it's through a localhost REST connection. And the service has the data for your application. And where does the service take the data from your application? It takes it from a specific component that was added, which is called LiveTile. This is the development for that application that I have running up there. Okay, so this LiveTile component lets you, well, it grabs automatically an app ID, and then this component what it does, it will push XML to the service, and the tile will fetch the XML and will tell Windows, hey, this is my data structure. And the data structure will be sooner or later, not immediately, sooner or later reflected in the tile. Now, at the very beginning, it's slow, and then the trick is, rather than running every 15 minutes, it starts a thread, and every minute it will stop the thread, do something very, very short, and then restop the thread. So it's basically a minute, the updates are 1 minute apart. But that's through a trick, and it's very delicate, because if you use too much CPU time, Windows is going to kill the thread. They kind of count the CPU cycles. I mean, it's crazy, but that's how it works. Okay, but it's basically working. So what we have here is, if I get into this application and I'll get back the 22 and type 22, and I don't need to hit update tile because I'm actually pushing the XML directly. What we should get sooner or later is a tile update, and it's not there yet. We might have to wait a full minute. I'm going to show something else, and then we'll get back here, see if the update was done. But that's the idea. So another thing I wanted to show, how you customize it, you can pick there is both a narrow tile and a wide tile, and there are many of them available. And these are all of the structure. It's an enumeration. It's a list of values, but we've grabbed some images and, well, changed them a bit from Microsoft. So this is the list of available structures that you have. Okay? For every structure that you pick, you can have one or more images, one or more line of text. The line of text have different roles, like the big one, the small one, the continuous ones, whatever. What you get is actually an XML structure that you can see here. This is read-only. You can change it. But this is basically the XML structure that the component is going to send to the service and to the tile. And of course, what it does, it uses kind of dynamic properties. So it will grab like text field 1, T2, which is the big one, and text field 3. So it actually uses a string list to have text field 1, T2, and text field 3 dynamic properties. And you fill those, and those will get sent to the component. Okay, when you change the template, you still have the older ones. You can remove the invalid ones, but they won't do any harm because they're just ignored. Because at runtime, what happens, it will take your string list, will take the XML, will do a merge, and send the information back. You can refer to images on the web, which is the easiest way of doing things, HTTP something. Or there is a folder that the live tile is allowed to read from, and you, as a developer, are allowed to read to. But the folder is kind of messed up. It uses the UID plus another name. It's called the family name. So it's kind of a tricky. The component should show you the folder name, but at times it doesn't because it's a bit messy. And the component, the other way they communicate is through the web service and through the registry. Most of the communication is through the registry. So if you want to kind of, if something is wrong, you have to go under the Metropolis, Embarcadero Metropolis, under software, Windows on Windows 64 folder. And you get to see, like when application starts, we'll register, it is starting. We'll monitor some registry keys for the backward communication and so on. The other thing you need is not only the service, but this listening launcher, because this is what lets you do this operation, get to the tile. Oops, why? Wrong. Click the wrong thing. And hopefully now we get, hey, 22, so it did update. So when you double click here, it will either start the executable once it's registered, or if it's already running, we'll just move that to the front. It first switches to desktop and then shows it to the front, so there is a little bit of delay, but we get your application up and running just clicking on the tile. And if you close it down, which I'm going to do by hitting the marvelous close button, if you close it down, you get back to here, it will start another instance. Okay, so it's more or less the behavior you get with the real WinRT applications activated through a tile, but it works. So you say, well, great, that's very nice. Yes, there is just one minor detail, that installing those tiles is a mess because you need to do side loading, and to do side loading, you have to mess up with some registry permissions and other things, And you need to own the enterprise version of Windows 8 connected to Active Directory and a bunch of other things. If you have just a poor man version of Windows, I mean the regular version of Windows 8, you're not allowed to do side loading unless you have a developer key, which you have either by buying Visual Studio or by asking for a free developer key that lasts a month. That's good for you for testing, but it's not good for deploying. So deploying to end users that do not have the enterprise version of Windows 8, it's kind of messy. Okay? And that's a significant drawback. I mean, it's working technically, but Microsoft is kind of blocking the installation, I mean, open, easy installation of this application to third parties. Okay? And as David I mentioned earlier, what you have with the LiveTile is a bunch of things. When you do instrument projects, what happens is that you get the default application structure, XML files, and some images that are brought over to your source code. So you get a subfolder. And I know I'm late, but just take it. So you have this style source folder that's just copied from the Object Inspector subfolder. So you have like some structure file. This is the app manifest you might want to fine-tune in specific situations that tells you everything about your application. There is the executable and other things, and then everything gets packaged into this XAML. This is the XAML. Everything gets packaged into the application is actually deployed up here. So this is the packaged application. And this is what you have to kind of copy over and install. It includes the compiled code. It includes the manifest with your custom ID. And also it includes these assets, which are these images. So if you want to replace that, these elements, like the helmet and those things with something of yours, the simplest way of doing it is updating these files. You replace these files with a new file. You do another build, and it will change the background UI. Okay? You can also change the files and update the manifest accordingly, but that's more confusing. So the easiest thing is to do this. And then at the component level, the next step you'll do is deploy tile. When you do deploy tile, you start executing a bunch of scripts, and you need to have visibility to some of the Windows SDK features. It runs a few scripts, but the source code of those scripts is available, so you can eventually, go through them and run them manually. But basically, you need the SDK for Windows 8 to do the code signing, because you need to code sign your application. You need either to create a custom code signing ID or just buy one sign file. This update manifest is useless, mostly, because every time you update something at design time, if there is a manifest file, it gets pushed immediately. So the only reason to have it is if you first update the tile and then instrument it, then you'll have to update the manifest. Otherwise, it's smooth. And you have a bunch of features. You can change colors. You can change some information. But again, the most relevant thing is to pick one of these structures. And again, you can also pick it from here. One of these structures, and then if I'm going to pick another one and then not save. Oops. Hey, come on. Doesn't get updated. Yeah. This is not good. It should be working. Well, let's do it this way. Okay. Pick it. Strings. Oh, no. There is no, it's right. There is the image. So this image is actually an extra property that you can have. And there is a header and a field. So somehow it was a similar structure. If you have something wrong, you get it kind of underlined. And you can remove the invalid elements here. Okay? So that's more or less the idea of the LiveTile update. Last thing I wanted to show you, because that's another reason for showing this demo, how you get a button like this, how you get the user interface. This is actually very nice. Once you have activated the Metropolis style, you get style hookup to the individual object. So, for example, you have all of these buttons ready to use. So gear button, nice configuration. They are all one click away. So you get all of the standard UI elements for Metro UI available at one. Just pick a button, pick a style, pick a button, pick a style. Of course, not the behavior. You have to implement the behavior. It's not like an action. It's only the UI element. Okay, so looking forward, yeah, we want to be able to get applications ready for mobile, sensors, video input, media support. There is a property that is a bit odd here, which is, I mean, it's a bit odd on Windows, which is the form factor. Like, and the only option you have in terms of devices is desktop. So it's not that you can pick anything else, but you can have orientation. So you can put your screen kind of up. I mean, you can, yeah, I can turn the laptop. It doesn't really work. It won't tilt the image. But there is already kind of ready to use support for tablets, for orientation, for, of course, other devices than desktop. So there are things that are kind of ready into the system. And I don't think we have much time for Q&A, but if there is any question you really have to ask, go ahead. Yep.
For those tweaks that you are now showing us, right, most likely they wouldn't work on a tablet PC that's running Windows 8 where you really want to use touch screen mainly, right, because that's a trimmed down version of the Windows 8 operating system. The enterprise stuff is really meant for desktops and servers.
Yeah, it's meant for desktops.
So really when the tablet PCs come out with Windows 8, you want to have something that's running mainly as a touch screen application. It has to run on the desktop.
Well, you can do that. I mean, if you get an Intel tablet, if you get an ARM tablet, there's no luck to run anything Delphi related. But if you get an Intel tablet, when they'll be available, you'll be able to use this same UI, and it should be touch-friendly enough that you can actually use it with a finger. And again, the gesture support, I couldn't get running. But the fact that the size of the buttons and other factors help creating, like the list box items, they're very big, help creating a touch-friendly application, even on Win32. Then, of course, if someone buys an ARM tablet with Windows 8, Win32 application will not run. And there's no way to get a Delphi application out of there. There's a way to get a RustStudio application out of there, which is using Prism, but that's a different story. So in terms of Delphi, there's no way for now to target ARM. But if you're targeting Intel, like the one that David and I had, then you can have Win32 apps that, again, you run it from the tiles, you run the application, and it looks like the same experience. There are some subtle differences, but it looks to the average user the same experience of WinRT apps, but they're written in Delphi. And maybe it's code you have written 10 years ago, and you're just moving it over if it's VCL-based. So yes, there are drawbacks. And the other thing, they have the stylus with the Intel tablet, so the stylus is very precise in terms of touch. So not the best experience, but still it's doable. I think that Windows 8 is I mean, there is a very big question of how Windows 8 will affect not just the PC market, because yeah, some people will migrate, some people will slow down, whatever, but how Windows 8 will affect the tablet and phone market is a very big question. It might get inroads. It might get nowhere. I mean, Intel tablets are going to be very expensive, as expensive as a regular laptop. So I'm not 100% convinced that they will sell the same way like iPads or other tablets are selling these days. But we'll have to wait and see. Like for 3 months, we'll start having some feeling of how well they're doing in the market. I mean, launching in a month, leave a couple of months to figure out how things are going, and we'll see. But Windows 8 by itself, I really encourage you to use Windows 8. Windows 8 desktop is so much better than Windows 7. Like, the task manager has got everything. I mean, including monitoring the network traffic is in task manager. I mean, the file copy. I mean, even the basic operations are so much better in Windows 8. And then if you really say, yeah, but I'm not sure I want to migrate because I want my start button, well, you can install this, a third-party start button that fully merges into. You can tell that you'll think this is Windows 7. Well, it's not. It's Windows 8 with a start button from a third party. Okay, we have to stop because there is lunch. If you have any further questions, I'm going to be around, not to the final Q&A because I have a plane to catch, but I'll be around for a few hours more. So feel free to stop by and ask, and I'll be more than happy to answer.
Gee, I'd love to see you